Over 500 million years ago, Earth's oceans quietly set the stage for the greatest drama in life's history. But before the story begins, we must rewind to an even earlier chapter, the brutal end of a global ice age. For nearly 10 million years, Earth was locked in ice, a frozen planet known as Snowball Earth. When the ice finally retreated, the climate remained unstable, and atmospheric oxygen was desperately low for complex life. Oxygen levels hovered at roughly 40% of what we breathe today, far too thin for anything advanced. Yet as glaciers melted, enormous volumes of frozen minerals and nutrients poured into the warming seas. These nutrient-rich waters transformed the oceans into a vast cradle, ready to nurture the earliest stirrings of life. At this time, the land was utterly barren. No plants, no animals, just empty rock and eroded gullies stretching endlessly. All of life's hopes rested entirely beneath the waves, in the silent darkness of the ancient ocean. The creatures of this era were humble microorganisms, single-celled beings, and the simplest multicellular forms imaginable. None possessed eyes or bones, none could hunt. They simply drifted, feeding passively on organic debris around them. Among them, cyanobacteria were the quiet heroes, photosynthetic pioneers steadily pumping oxygen into the world. Bubble by bubble, these microscopic organisms build a thin oxidized layer on the ocean's surface over countless millennia. This seemingly minor chemical shift was quietly stockpiling the essential energy that complex life would later desperately need. Earth had become a silent natural laboratory, patiently brewing a revolution hidden deep beneath the undisturbed waves. Then, approximately 541 million years ago, the oceans reached a tipping point of oxygen and stability. What followed was the most astonishing event in the history of life on Earth, the Cambrian explosion. In just 20 to 25 million years, a mere blink in geological time, over 80% of modern animal phyla appeared. Life abandoned its old strategy of passive survival and plunged headlong into an era of fierce competition and specialization. The oceans transformed into a ruthless evolutionary battlefield, where only the fittest would earn the right to persist. Dominating this battlefield was Anomalocaris, a fearsome predator that could grow up to 2 meters in length, with spiny grasping appendages and a hard circular mouth. Anomalocaris reigned as the undisputed overlord of the seas. Faced with such deadly hunters, prey species had no choice but to rapidly evolve better defenses to survive. Trilobites developed hard mineralized exoskeletons, turning their bodies into armored fortresses against the predator's crushing jaws. Others evolved sharp defensive spines, while some mastered the ancient arts of burrowing and camouflage to stay alive. This relentless cycle of attack and defense ignited a vigorous evolutionary arms race across the Cambrian oceans. Perhaps the most revolutionary breakthrough was the emergence of compound eyes, granting creatures the gift of sharp vision. With the ability to see clearly, organisms could now detect predators and prey at distance, transforming survival strategies forever. Meanwhile, archaeal, cyathids, and early corals began constructing the planet's very first reef systems on the ocean floor. These primitive reefs provided crucial shelter and habitat, enabling small organisms to hide, feed, and reproduce safely. With producers, consumers, and decomposers now in place, Earth's earliest complete marine food chain took shape at last. The Burgess Shale fossil bed in Canada preserves a stunning record of this explosive era in remarkable detail. Among its treasures, Anomalocaris fossils reveal the specialized anatomy of the era's most formidable apex predator. As top predator, Anomalocaris regulated populations of mid-level organisms, maintaining a critical ecological balance in the oceans. The tiny hallucigenia, only a few centimeters long, walked on quad legs with protective spines rising from its back. Feeding on debris and plankton, hallucigenia served as a vital bridge linking the ocean's bottom and upper ecological layers. The thumb-sized malaria, with distinctive pinsa, like chelicerae, offers key evidence for the origin of modern arachnids and scorpions. Wywaxia carried overlapping, armored plates on its back, an early prototype of the mineralized defenses seen in later species. The tiny but abundant Marella, with its segmented body and multiple appendages, formed a foundational prey base for the ecosystem. Primitive crinoids anchored themselves to the seafloor, using feathery arms to filter plankton from the flowing currents. Together, these organisms formed a complete and interconnected food chain, the stable backbone of the Cambrian ocean ecosystem. This ecological stability was not fragile. It carried forward, laying a robust foundation for the next great chapter of life. Approximately 485 million years ago, Earth entered the Ordovician period, the golden age of marine life. The global climate had stabilized remarkably, with no catastrophic ice ages or massive volcanic eruptions to disrupt the tranquility. Sea levels rose to extraordinary heights, flooding most continental landmasses and creating vast expanses of warm shallow seas. These shallow seas were bathed in abundant sunlight, rich in oxygen and nutrients, a true paradise for life to flourish. Inheriting Cambrian innovations, primitive crinoids evolved far more complex, branching arms and became the shallow sea's dominant residents. Brachiopods refined their protective exoskeletons, adapting to an ever-widening range of shallow sea environments with remarkable versatility. The ecological chain grew richer than ever before. Producers, consumers, and decomposers filled every available niche with new species. Biodiversity in the Ordovician oceans reached a breathtaking peak surpassing anything the planet had ever witnessed before. Crinoids, brachiopods, and shelled mollusks multiplied in staggering numbers, forming dense underwater forests across the shallow seas. Crinoids gracefully filtered plankton from the currents. Brachiopods snapped their shells shut at the first sign of danger. Mollusks crept steadily across the seafloor, methodically searching for food among the sediment and organic debris below. The widespread development of mineralized exoskeletons marked a crucial evolutionary milestone during this prosperous era. Hard shells did more than defend against predators. They signified that evolution itself had reached a new level of maturity. The oceans had truly become a vibrant paradise of life, thriving in a delicate balance that seemed destined to last forever. But forever is a promise that Earth has never been willing to keep for any of its children. Deep beneath the surface, tectonic plates were silently drifting, carrying entire continents toward a fateful collision with catastrophe. Massive landmasses gradually converged and drifted toward the South Pole, triggering dramatic and irreversible climate shifts across the globe. Approximately 444 million years ago, a devastating new ice age gripped the planet with merciless force. This was the trigger for Earth's first mass extinction, the Ordovician extinction, one of the most devastating events in history. Temperatures plunged catastrophically, the ocean's surface froze over, and sea levels dropped with terrifying speed across the globe. The shallow continental shelves that had nurtured so much life were suddenly exposed, drained dry, and left utterly barren. Habitats that had thrived for millions of years were destroyed almost overnight. The paradise of life was shattered completely. Brachiopods, living sessile lives with almost no ability to move, were among the very first victims of the falling temperatures. Crinoids, entirely dependent on warm shallow seas, watched their feeding efficiency collapse as temperatures plummeted around them relentlessly. Without their anchoring substrates, crinoids could not migrate to warmer waters. They were trapped and sentenced to die. Corals, exquisitely sensitive to temperature and oxygen levels, perished outright as conditions turned freezing and hypoxic simultaneously. With the corals gone, the entire reef ecosystem collapsed like a house of cards, taking countless dependent species with it. The mighty Camarasaurus, with its massive body and enormous oxygen demands, could not survive the suffocating grip of hypoxia. Starved of both oxygen and prey, the 9-meter giant was driven to extinction. The ocean's throne now stood empty. To make everything worse, slowed ocean circulation caused toxic anoxic water from the deep to surge upward to the surface. This deadly upwelling poisoned the remaining habitable zones, systematically dismantling the last remnants of the marine food chain. Even the resilient trilobites suffered catastrophic losses, with only a handful of small species barely clinging to existence. Over roughly 2 million years, this relentless extinction wiped out between 80 and 85% of all marine species. The once vibrant oceans fell into an eerie silence, the grand underwater paradise reduced to a desolate graveyard of shells. The ecosystem was forced into a complete and brutal restart. Millions of years of evolutionary progress seemingly undone in an instant. Yet, extinction is never truly the end. It is nature's most cruel but effective method of evolutionary selection and renewal. The survivors were not random. They were small, adaptable, and remarkably tolerant of freezing temperatures and suffocating low oxygen. Small trilobites and primitive brachiopods endured where giants had fallen, carrying within them evolutionary genes stretching back to the Cambrian. These humble survivors became the essential foundation, the living seeds from which all subsequent life would eventually spring again. From quiet dormancy to explosive carnival, from golden prosperity to devastating catastrophe. This was the prologue of life on Earth. The catastrophe was merciless, but it cleared the stage, leaving behind empty ecological niches, waiting to be filled once more. As the climate slowly recovered, surviving species launched a brand new wave of evolutionary radiation across the healing oceans. They rebuilt a more complex and resilient marine ecosystem during the Silurian and Devonian periods that followed the catastrophe. And then, for the first time in history, life began its courageous march from the oceans onto the barren and waiting land. The stage of life expanded from ocean to continent, and the story of evolution had only just begun its next magnificent chapter. If you liked this video, don't forget to like, subscribe and share. See you next time.